Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take your stack of sources and pull out the insights you need to be not just informed, but genuinely enlightened. Today, we are wrestling with a psychological construct that is so often praised in public as a virtue, but, it causes this massive silent stress in private. We're talking about perfectionism. We're going to dive deep into its tangled roots and explore the really devastating consequences the sources lay bare.
And our mission today is for you, the learner. We need to move way beyond the common idea that perfectionism is just, attention to detail or striving for quality. We're going to expose it for what the psychological research says it really is, a rigid and frankly toxic belief system. And understanding the mechanics of that system, that's the first step to dismantling the prison it creates.
Because let's be honest, who hasn't used the phrase, I'm a perfectionist, as a kind of humble brag, right? But what the source material shows us is that it's less about high standards and a lot more about deep fear. So if it isn't innate, if we're not born needing everything to be flawless, the big question is, where does it actually come from? Okay, let's unpack this system piece by piece.
What's really fascinating here is that the sources all agree on one thing immediately. Perfectionism is not a single cause issue. It's never just one thing. It's a complex construct, almost like a tightly woven net where you have these external pressures and the individual's own internal defenses all tangled together, and they form this rigid, unforgiving structure.
And when you start pulling on those external threads, the research almost always points back to one place first. Early family upbringing, we're talking about the messages a lot of people get growing up, unrealistically high parental expectations. And this is the crucial part, the idea of conditional love.
Conditional love is so insidious, it basically replaces unconditional acceptance with a kind of transaction. It sends the message, I love you when you excel, when you're the best, when you're flawless.
Wow. So love isn't a given, it's something you have to earn.
Exactly. The child learns that love and safety are rewards for performance, not just a baseline of their existence. It puts them on this emotional treadmill where they feel like they can never stop running, because if they stop, the love stops too.
That dynamic is incredibly damaging. And then you add a culture of constant criticism on top of that, where, tiny errors are pointed out, but praise is really rare. And what about the modeling effect? Kids see their parents acting this way.
Oh, absolutely. They internalize it. They mimic the perfectionist behaviors they see every day, inheriting the anxiety right along with the high standards.
And that anxiety-driven world just bleeds right into our educational systems, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources point out how modern schools are almost designed to cultivate this obsession with static results. Perfect scores. First place. The whole system emphasizes the final outcome, the grade, way more than the actual messy, valuable process of learning.
Which means mistakes aren't just discouraged, they're penalized. They're seen as failures, not as what they really are, which are growth opportunities. And that fear of making a mistake, it solidifies right when kids are trying to figure out who they are.
Yes, and they start tying their identity directly to their performance. Then if you zoom out even further, you see the massive role of, our whole culture, society is constantly selling this myth of the overnight success, the individual legend who just sort of appeared fully formed without any of the struggle.
And nothing packages that myth better than social media.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the ultimate highlight reel. It sells this impossible image of the perfect life. Every background is filtered, every achievement is glossy, and all the hours of failure are just edited out. It sets up this totally dishonest bar for comparison.
And then you enter the professional world, and the job market seems to be looking for superhumans, right?
Yeah.
People who can manage 10 projects while running a side hustle and maintaining a perfect fitness routine. It's a completely unsustainable standard that's presented as the only way to be.
Okay, so we have this intense external force field of pressure. Family, school, culture, all demanding perfection. But wait. Why do some people internalize it so deeply while others don't? Why does an individual actually adopt this belief system?
That's the critical question. And the sources identify some key internal factors. Fundamentally, perfectionism acts as a psychological defense mechanism. It's a massive, rigid shield against feelings of insecurity or low self-esteem that are already there.
So it's a way to try and get control.
Precisely. In a world that feels chaotic, seeking absolute flawlessness in your own little domain, your work, your appearance, it's a desperate attempt to control anxiety. And at the very core of all of this is just an overwhelming fear. Fear of criticism, fear of rejection, fear of failure.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Based on that insight from Dr. Khaled in the source material, this is the distinction we absolutely have to get.
Yes, this insight is, it's almost surgical. The
Yeah.
key is understanding what the perfectionist is actually afraid of. They're not just afraid of failing at a task, like missing a deadline or something. They're afraid that failing at the task means that they are a failure.
So the project and the person become the same thing.
Exactly. That's the fundamental problem. This complete conflation of self-worth and achievement. If someone without this issue makes a mistake, they might think, oh, the report failed. But the perfectionist's internal voice says, I am a failure. They use this impossible pursuit of flawlessness to try and prove their own worth, which they feel is unstable.
Wow. And how does that intense fear then translate into, daily life? What does it look like?
It leads to this really destructive cycle because the stakes are so high. I mean, they're betting their identity on the outcome. They can't tolerate anything less than perfect. And that's why we have to talk about the dark side now, because the sources are very clear. This can become a genuine prison.
The second that belief takes hold, the costs start racking up. And the first one is a big paradox. It seems totally counterintuitive. Chronic procrastination.
It is the great irony, isn't it? The person who wants the perfect outcome is the one who puts off starting. It happens because their mindset is, if I can't guarantee I can do this perfectly, right now, I'll just wait. And of course, that perfect moment never comes. So they delay to protect themselves from even the possibility of failure.
And that avoidance leads straight to exhaustion and burnout. It must be the result of just relentless internal pressure, day in and day out. You're always measuring yourself against a fantasy.
Yes, and that constant gap between reality, what you actually did, and the flawless ideal, it creates this gnawing feeling of inadequacy. This fuels anxiety. It often leads to depression because the goalposts are always moving further away. It's a self-perpetuating cycle.
It also shows up as analysis paralysis, right? That feeling of being unable to make a decision because you're looking for the one perfect option.
Imagine trying to launch a simple website. The perfectionist isn't okay with a functional 80%. No. They spend 3 months debating fonts or optimizing images that load a half-second faster. This ties right into professional risk avoidance. You end up clinging to a comfort zone where the chance of failure is zero.
But that means the chance for growth is also zero.
Also zero. You can't grow if you refuse to risk.
That makes perfect sense. No risk, no experimentation, no innovation. Now let's talk about the impact on relationships, which I think is often really underestimated. If you're that harsh on yourself, it's almost guaranteed you're going to place those same impossible expectations on other people.
Absolutely, and that translates directly into problems with collaboration. We've all met the person with that classic perfectionist mantra, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. It leads to micromanagement and inability to delegate, and it just alienates team members who are delivering high-quality work, just not flawlessness.
And it must drive social isolation, too. You spend so much energy keeping up this flawless mask that you're terrified of people seeing the real messy you behind it. You withdraw because real connection requires vulnerability, and that means risking imperfection.
And on a professional or creative level, the damage is immense. The sources state it very clearly. Perfectionism kills creativity, full stop. Creativity needs freedom. It needs room to experiment, to make bad prototypes, to make mistakes without judgment. The fear of failure just stifles that.
It's the difference between iterating quickly and just polishing something forever that might not even be the right thing. It's a huge waste of resources, time, effort, money. This is where that law of diminishing returns becomes a real destructive thing.
We're talking about that phenomenon where a staggering 80% of the effort goes into perfecting the final, often unnecessary, 20% of a project. The client was happy at the 80% mark, but that internal fear demanded 3 more weeks of polishing. And crucially, it prevents learning. If failure is the greatest teacher, then perfectionism robs you of your most valuable lessons.
The sources had that story about a graphic designer, Samira, and I think it brings this professional cost to life better than any chart could.
Samira's story is a painful example of this waste. She talked about spending 4 full days on one single design element, adjusting pixels, changing color hues by 1%, delaying delivery. And she missed out on 2 new projects because of it. She got to the point where she was crying in front of her screen because her self-worth was so tied to the flawlessness of that one image.
And the really heartbreaking irony, when she finally submitted the work, she found out the client was thrilled. They told her they had been perfectly happy with the first quick version she could have sent on day one. That's the real cost, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not just the stress, but actual missed opportunities and wasted time on effort that nobody else even required.
Which brings us to the great paradox at the heart of this entire deep dive. The obsessive pursuit of perfection often becomes the single biggest obstacle to achieving true excellence.
That's a hard truth to face.
Yeah.
So for you, the learner, the key is separating those two things. If we want excellence, which is healthy, we have to understand how it's different from perfectionism, which is toxic. Let's lay that out clearly.
Okay. Excellence is about continuous progress. It's about learning. It's about being flexible. It's human. It sees vulnerability as part of the process. It's all about growth. Think of it like a river. It's always flowing, always adapting, but always moving forward.
Whereas perfectionism is static. It demands a single flawless, unblemished outcome. It's harsh and rigid and completely unforgiving. It's not a river. It's more like a statue. It's sterile. It doesn't move.
And excellence accepts that mistakes are part of the journey. Perfectionism treats mistakes as an identity crisis, a sign that you are fundamentally flawed. So the first step out of that prison is just awareness, distinguishing between striving for excellence and obsessing over perfection. That recognition creates the pathway for real change.
So what does this all mean for us? I think the takeaway is that understanding where the pressure comes from, both externally and internally, it allows us to reframe our whole approach. We can start judging our efforts by the criteria of progress, not the impossible standard of flawlessness.
It allows us to see that the shield we've been carrying is actually just heavy armor that's slowing us down and isolating us.
And speaking of a path forward, we want to leave you with a really practical challenge from the source material, something you can do right now. Monitor your internal dialogue.
Pay attention to the rigidity in your own language. How often do you find yourself using these harsh, non-negotiable words? Things like, I must finish this, or I have to get this perfect, or I always mess this up.
Yeah, or I never measure up.
That language reflects the rigid system we've been talking about. The challenge is to consciously replace those words with kinder, more spacious language. Instead of, I must be flawless, try, I will try my best and learn from what happens. Use words like can or I would like or sometimes. Kinder language literally creates a more forgiving reality for you to work in.
And we'll leave you with a final provocative thought, something to really consider as you start to shed that armor. Brené Brown said, perfectionism is a shield we carry, thinking it will protect us, when in fact it is the very thing that prevents us from showing up as we are and experiencing true connection.
That fear of imperfection, it keeps us isolated and stalls our progress more than any external obstacle ever could. We really encourage you to keep exploring that difference between excellence, which invites progress, and perfection, which demands the impossible. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll talk to you next time.